Hello, my name is Joe Micklick. I'm a qualified business and marketing trainer and assessor, and today I'll guide you through task 3 and 4 for the unit Manage Risk BSBRSK501. But before I do that, I'll need to take you through tasks 1 and 2 because these assessments are all interlinked. So I'll have to give you a quick recap on task 1 and task 2, so then that way we can then progress on to task 3 and 4. If I look at task 1 just very quickly, what you had to do previously was you were required to determine the risk context associated with establishing a new business outlet within the existing business structure. Well, that was, if you remember, it was the acquisition of Hurley's Cafe by McVille's Cafe, where you were required to review the internal and external environmental factors and communicate with all stakeholders to generate a list of risks. And then in addition to that, you were required to review risk management processes and determine scope and objectives, take into account stakeholder input in both internal and external environmental factors of McVille, the organisation. With the information gathered, then you were to identify risks and present this to relevant parties for feedback. So essentially, what that meant was that you had to go through and list the information, the risk review. There's your title there. Just a quick recap. This is the task 1. So you had your scope there. You had your goals, you had your stakeholders, list of stakeholders, and as the question mentioned just then, internal and external stakeholders, and their role in the process, along with their stake. So here's my table there all the way through. CEO, assistant manager, James Mansfield, the current supervisor, all the information is from the case study. The employees of the Toowoomba Cafe, the existing employees, the seller, so on and so forth. So that's something similar to what you should have had there for your stakeholders. In addition to that, the question was asked about the environment. So there's your analysis: political, economical, social, technology, commonly known as PEST environment. This is then external environmental factors, elements of the business that are uncontrollable. So you have no influence, basically, on what happens here in this market here, the macro environment or external environment, commonly called. So there it is there. Your pest analysis. You had to have listed your SWOT. Again, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to your business. There's your SWOT analysis. Your research there, and all information derived from the case study. Also, you were to describe the scenario. You were required to summarize notes from the manager. There it is there. That information is from the case study in task 1. As I scroll down, your draft communication was another requirement as well for your task 1. So then that leads us on to task 2, the case study risk analysis, where you were required to analyze the risks identified in the case study to assess the likelihood and consequences of the risk. So there it is there. So my table: likelihood and consequences of the risks, and evaluate and prioritize the risks. So here I am prioritizing. There's my heading there. And determine options for treatment of each risks. So there it is. There's my options. And then you were to use information. Using the information, you were required to develop an action plan for implementing the risk treatment, and document the plan as required and communicate the risk management to relevant parties. So basically, here I am here. There's my requirements: likelihood, consequences, risk score as well, the rating, priorities, and my options, list of options there. And this is, as I said last time, using the Likert 5-point scale system there. That's how we derived our risk score there. And so as we go down, again, the task 2 asked us to list the consequences that they are there. It asked us to list the priorities, options. That's from the table. Don't forget the headings. Priorities, options, priorities. See, as I'm scrolling down, and also the risk management plan for task 2. So here I am here. The risk, cultural conflicts after the acquisition. Cultural conflicts, it means when McVille's Cafe takes over Hurley's Cafe, there may be some cultural arguments, employees arguing amongst one another because Hurley's employees have a system or in place for their operations of the cafe, whereas Hurley's might have a different system in place. And so people are always or employees are always reluctant to change systems. So that's why, hence the word conflict, there's differences and disputes and stuff. So that's a risk. And when that happens, it destabilizes the culture. And when that happens, unfortunately, you'll get, from the business point of view, lower efficiency levels and lower productivity levels from the employee. So there I am there, the risks, all the different risks, lack of internal controls, failure to meet compliance, so on, lack of written policy, all the way there. And in addition to that, I've assessed my risk, as I explained last time. The controls that were in place, monitoring systems, timelines when things were to be done and completed, and the person responsible there. So there's my table there. As I scroll down, we hit now assessment 3. So that was a quick overview of assessment task 1 and 2, and now we're under 3. And then there's one more after this, 4. So putting this aside for a moment, 1 and 2, we'll get on to assessment task 3. And I'll bring you back to the actual assignment itself. There I am there. All right, so monitoring the report. For this assessment, you're required to review the implementation of the action plan developed in task 2 and prepare a monitoring report. So there it is there. That's why I've given you a quick rundown or an overview of what you did in task 1 and 2, because this obviously links on to task 2. So we're required to review the implementation of the action plan, which I just showed you that you developed in assessment task 2, and prepare a monitoring report. Assessment description, review the implementation of the action plan developed in task 2 against the case study provided. There's another case study. If I scroll down very quickly, here's a short case study. There it is there, case study. So we'll read through that soon enough, as soon as we get there. So then prepare a monitoring report evaluating the risk management processes. So here's my heading for procedure. Okay, so review the provided case study information in order to develop a report examining the ongoing implementation of a risk management action plan using the following headings. So we need to use the following headings. Plan a clear summary of the initial risk and the plan implemented to manage it. Implementation, a summary of all actions taken to date in attempting to manage identified risks. Outcomes, a clear statement identifying continued and or reduced risks with supporting information in tables or graphs where available. Evaluation, a clear analysis of the effectiveness of the risk management plan by comparing the implementation with the outcomes. I'll show you that in a minute in a sample assessment, but I'll just quickly read this. After you have completed the above steps, you need to communicate your evaluation of the risk management plan to your organisation by submitting your report to your manager, your assessor, for internal distribution. When submitting the report and plan, you need to ensure that your report is titled Evaluation of Risk Management Plan, and your report is submitted as required by your organisation. So let's just quickly go up here. So there's some information I need for my implementation of a risk management plan, action plan. So I need to list the plan, implementation, outcomes, evaluation. So let's go back and have a look at one that I did earlier, and I'll show you what that should look like. All right, there I am here. There. The title, don't forget, evaluation of risk management plan. So I've got my title up there. There's my assessment 3, research project, monitoring report. And as I scroll down under plan, I've noted the plan should well treat the 6 identified risks as in the above context. Above 6 risks up there, which we already read out before, just moments ago. Cultural conflicts after the acquisition, I already explained that. Employees from one place having disputes and whatnot when they merge with another workplace. Lack of written policy, failure to meet compliance standard, lack of professional business culture, failure in monitoring or overseeing all this, and others, lack of internal controls. So that's all derived from our table here. See there, lack of cultural conflicts, lack of internal controls, failure to meet compliance. We've listed that here in our plan. For each risk identified, the monitoring plan includes implementation of risks, management activities, outcomes expected, and evaluation. So the next part was the implementation. So there's my plan, there's my implementation, and within this implementation I've listed, it's a table is summarized from the case with referring to efforts on dealing with the many risks identified. So here's my headings: implementation of risk management measures, the outcomes, and the evaluation of it. So if you note from the case study, $5,000 was spent on insurance. It's a risk management measure that was implemented, introduced. The outcome, the insurance premium was $2,500 per year, and which is considered excessive by a financial controller. So in other words, that risk, or to manage that particular risk, did not go according to plan, because another approach was that it was identified that this amount spent on insurance could even be cheaper at half the price or half the value there. So as I go down here, my implementation, I've got my plan to open in the first week. Open about 4 weeks after opening at the bank, 2 shops down the street. And that's listed in our case study as well. Don't forget evaluation. So evaluation, no, I'm not totally there. The teleconferencing system planned for 6 months after settlement. You remember all this from task 1 case study that was listed in the case study, task 1, where the teleconferencing system was introduced because of a 2-hour commute drive from McVille's Cafe to Hurley's Cafe. It was a 2-hour commute, and there was concern senior staff or management were unable to meet meetings at different locations. So here I am here, the teleconferencing system planned for 6 months after settlement. Outcomes, it's not yet done. And evaluation, no. And plan to close at 3 p.m. and so on and so forth. So here's my list of implementation of the risks. So as I go down, your assignment should look something like this. So I get to outcomes. Outcomes are also identified in the table in 3.2. That's there. Outcomes there. That's what they're referring to there. By comparing the measures conducted with the expected outcome and the real conditions after implementation of the risks management efforts. And evaluation. Here's what I've listed here regarding evaluation. Evaluation suggested that McVille had successfully handled some risks with the multiple efforts, while the corporation still failed to solve all the risks identified. Some risk managers failed to well emphasize situations facing McVille to identify potentials on closing the gaps in the management practices, so on. So there's my evaluation, there's my outcomes, my table from the case study, don't forget, task 1, with referring to efforts of dealing with many risks identified. So that part's my implementation bit. You've got your plan, but this is implementing it, putting it into practice, basically. That's what implementation is. Introducing it in the real life scenario. Okay, now we'll go back to assignments. Go back to the question. There it is there. So we've covered these key areas: plan, implementation, outcomes, evaluation. If I scroll down, we should get to the stage, and I'll read that case study out for you and simplify it. There's my case study there, which is a page and a bit in length. Don't forget, when you're doing your implementation, the implementation I just showed you need to read this case study first. Okay, so this is the case study, the implementation information. So it's crucial to read these headings always and subheadings. In accordance with, I'll just bring that up. In accordance with the risk management plan, an external audit was completed and presented 6 months later to the board. The audit investigated the status of the planned actions on the risks identified. This is the summary of the findings is as follows from the audit. So the financial controller had taken out $5,000 on insurance cover for cash held on premises overnight from the opening week as planned, but the insurance premium was $2,500 per year, and which is considered excessive by a financial controller. So remember that I just read that out before in my table. So you need to go through this carefully, and at this stage start formulating your responses, because this information, along with others there, is sticking out at you. So they've taken out $5,000, but the insurance, follow the word, but the insurance premium was $2,500 per year. So I've listed that information in my table there. If I just quickly go back, there it is there. It was the first thing I noted there. I'm following the order, sequential order, there. Implementation of risk management measures. $5,000 spent on insurance. What's the outcome? The outcome is half was only required. See, so you're not making up this stuff. You're following criteria from a case study, the task 3 case study there. That's how I've plucked that information out and put it into here. So let's go back. Go back to our assignment. There it is there. There. So that's that information there. See? Moving along, the company bank account that was planned to open in the first week was opened about 4 weeks after opening at the bank 2 shops down the street. But it is not McPhil's regular bank, and there are difficulties with getting the same level of service that the stores receive in Brisbane. So I think what they're looking for is convenience there, and probably to fast track the process. The teleconferencing system planned for 6 months after settlement, after the acquisition, after McPhil's purchases Hurley's Cafe, is what this means. So after the acquisition. So the teleconferencing system planned for 6 months after settlement, after the acquisition, has not yet been installed, due in part to the delay in the federal government's national broadband network rollout. So there's been a delay there. So that delay has been unfortunate, and that delay has a direct relationship with how the government rolls out their broadband network. Because obviously the better the broadband, the more, or better the technology, such as the teleconferencing system. So what they're waiting on is the improvement of the broadband, or the rollout of it. And then again, if I go back, I have reflected that information back into our table. There it is there. Teleconferencing system planned for 6 months after settlement. Outcomes not yet, because it's still in progress. The government's still rolling out the broadband. So that's how I've listed this in the table. So essentially, you're plucking out the relevant information from this case study and putting it into this implementation table. Not to mention that previous passage I read out prior to the teleconferencing system about the bank opening in the first week, see? So I've listed that information there as well. And we'll go back to our assignment. There. So the weekly, where am I up to here? The weekly management meetings are finishing or closing to 3 p.m. as planned, but sometimes the manager has to stay on at the request of the head office team. The manager has not yet been issued with an excusal letter by the CEO as agreed upon. It feels that they do not have the authority to just walk out at 3 p.m. So obviously there needs to be a system there in place, and probably even some policies. The assistant manager training has been shifted to the mornings, allowing the manager to leave before 1 p.m. as planned. So that again can be listed in the table. The board and the CEO included a new policy regarding compliance with the Toowoomba bylaw on water conservation as planned, but the scientific procedure has not yet been written, although it appears that compliance is being achieved. The plants have been changed to natives. This is to save the water conservation. That was discussed in the previous task 1. So the plants have been changed to natives. They require minimal water as planned. The installation of dual flush toilets were planned for completion 6 months after settlement. And although the dual flush toilets have been ordered and in stock, they cannot be installed due to the backlog of work by district plumbers. So there's a delay there. Plumbers are preoccupied doing some other work, some other places. So there's a delay there, hence the word backlog there. But that information, again, it derived from task 1. The application to make good by Goldsmith Partners on behalf of McPhail was accepted by the Toowoomba City Council. However, the grace period, calling off period to comply with bylaw ends in 14 days. And the store is still above the acceptable benchmark for water use. The training on daily banking appears to have been successfully completed as planned. An audit of the bank deposit book shows that on only 2 occasions in the past 6 months, there is not a banking entry for the day's sales. So that's reflected back in the table as well. There's been 1 internal audit arranged by the store, and as planned, there should have been a call earlier 2 months, or every 2 months, sorry. The store manager cites the distance that auditors have to travel and their overloaded work with the Brisbane stores as the reason for this infrequency. Although the training on the water saving process as directed by the policy has been verbally explained to follow, the written procedure has not been completed as a store's manager claims to be too busy. All right, so things don't seem to be perfect at this stage. There's a problem there. There's a problem there of being too busy. There's a problem there with auditors complaining about distance travelling. There are delays. The water conservation is not up to scratch. So, you've got all these different delays, and they're all interdependent on others, such as the plumbers. the tradies being too busy. If they're too busy, well, then unable to install the dual flush toilet system. So there's all sorts of different delays and things going on here. If I just read on, a water tank had been built into the courtyard, but the plumbing has not been yet connected. See, and again, another delay there. There's a weekly water usage monitor in the staff room as planned, but the information has not been updated for the past 3 weeks. Okay, so there's your case study there. So that information, there's another one there's another one there. Usually a different issue per paragraph is reflected back into my implementation table. So let's go back, have a look and see what I've done here. There it is there. So I've gone there, see? Again, we've just read this, the installation of dual flush toilets still cannot be installed. We're waiting on the plumber, the local district plumber. Plumber's preoccupied doing other jobs first. You need to, they're in the queue, basically. We're back at this table, implementation. So all that information from the case study, not too difficult at all. Again, there was mention of the new policy regarding compliance with the Toowoomba bylaw on water conservation as planned. It has been developed while not well implemented. See, there's any issues are listed here. The application made good by Goldsmith Partners on behalf of McVille. Again, there's Toowoomba stuff, City Council information there. Regarding the grace period, the training on daily banking have been successful, yes, and so on. The water tank has been built, so all that information, yes, reflected back into the table. There's my outcomes there, as I said earlier, and the evaluation there. Okay, so I'll just quickly scroll up, and assessment tasks 3 should include this information: the title, the plan, 6 identified risks. We've reflected that into our implementation table with our appropriate heading, outcomes, and evaluation. Put that all in there, and in addition to this, we've introduced or derived or extracted, if you will, material from a case study and put it into our table, and included outcomes and evaluation. So we'll go back to our assessment task 3. We'll just quickly scroll up and make sure we have all the areas covered. So there's our case study. We've just read that, nice and easy. Practically each paragraph would have, on average, would have a different issue. There's another one there, the Toowoomba bylaw on water conservation. We just saw that on the table. I just showed you Toowoomba bylaw. So there it is there, Toowoomba bylaw. So yeah, pretty much we've covered everything. And pretty much everything, each paragraph is a different kind of concern or an issue there. So a lot of information is extracted from this and slotted into our implementation table. So we'll scroll up, make sure we have everything covered. So here we are here. Excuse me, we have our procedure, our plan, our implementation table, our outcomes, and our evaluation there. We've gone through and made the appropriate heading, title, valuation, risk management, and that was accompanied by information derived from our case study, which is introduced into our table. Okay, so that pretty much covers task 3. Not too difficult at all. That's because you already have stored information regarding task 1 and 2, whilst introducing a little bit of material regarding task 3, which pretty much is it's interlinked. It's a following on from task 1 and 2, and so that's why, hence, it makes task 3 much easier to understand and comprehend, because it's all interlinked. So that concludes task 3. In a moment, I'll start task 4, which is a knowledge test, and which is a series of questions. I think it's pretty short, although perhaps we may be able to go through that in this lecture as well. I'll just pause for the moment, have a quick look, and let you know in a minute. Okay, yes. So task 4 is a knowledge test. I'll just bring that up quickly. This is task 3. Let's share and go on to task 4. If I can find that, where am I? Here, I think. Task 4. So there we are, knowledge test. So for these tasks, you're required to demonstrate an understanding of standards and legislation relevant to risk management and the management of risks across an organisation in a range of contexts. So, understanding of standards and legislation. You will be presented with a series of questions, provide written responses to the questions, and as we're scrolling down, here are the questions here, prompt questions. What are 3 ways that research can be conducted for risk-related issues? For each way, briefly describe how it may be done. So there it is there. These are short answer questions. So you can list your responses beneath there. Fishbone checklists and brainstorming are both tools that can be used in risk management. Describe each of these and when they would best be used. A lot of this information is found in your PowerPoint slides and the soft copy version of your textbooks. Perhaps even Google might have some of these answers. What are the 5 stages of risk likelihood? We've gone through this. Briefly describe each one. 5 stages. Let's give an example description for each of the 5 levels of consequence for risk. What needs should be considered when treating risk? This to describe 3 treatments that could be considered. What should be included in a risk action plan? We just saw that about 10 or 15 minutes ago in your assignment. I just showed you my sample copy version, so the information's in there. Describe the key inclusions and briefly the type of information included with each inclusion. Here's another one. How does Australian Standards, New Zealand Australian Standards ISO 31000, 2009 risk management principles and guidelines standard assist organizations to reduce risk? You put that in Google, or in fact, it's probably even in your soft copy book version as well. Insert, look for that, and your answer's there. And here's another one there, on to the last 3 left. For each of the pieces of legislation listed, 1, 2, 3, describe the intent of each. Intent of each, or in other words, the purpose of each, and how it could impact on the process of managing risk. Privacy laws. What's the purpose of privacy laws? Work health safety regulation. Describe the intent of each. What's the purpose of it or intent? And don't forget, 2-part question. Part 1, describe the intent of each to keep employees' personal details private. That's part 1. Part 2, how it could impact on the process of managing risks. So then you list how it could impact the process of managing a particular risk, the privacy laws. Again, same for work health safety regulation. Describe the intent of each to reduce employee injuries in the workplace, to reduce the incidences in the workplace or near accidents and so forth, and how it could impact on the process of managing risks. So to manage a risk, it's going to reduce the incidences of accidents in the workplace. Another legislation, contract law. Describe the intent of each, a contract law, and how it could impact the process of managing risks. So there they are there. Name and give an example of, for 3 adjustments that can be made in the workplace to assist a person with a disability. The wheelchair, ramp, handles, perhaps another one. The flooring, level of flooring. There's two types of insurance an organisation could consider purchasing, two types, and for each type describe the risks covered by the insurance and the benefit to the organisation. Well, one could be public liability, so your employees are covered in the event of a workplace accident. Another one could be perhaps another insurance could be intellectual property, protection, copyright, patent, and so on. So that's another kind of insurance as well. Something for you to think about. Okay, that about concludes task 3 and 4. Until then, we'll see you next time.